And now we're going to bring in Aykan Erdemir, a senior fellow for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Let's start with Mattis's visit with the Kurdish president. How significant is it that a top U.S. official is meeting with the Kurdish president?
This is a very significant meeting because the Kurdistan regional government has been a close ally of the United States in the fight against terror and in protecting ethnic and religious minorities in the region. But having said that, there are clear differences of opinion as to the referendum. The KRG government is keen on carrying forward with the September 25th referendum, whereas the US administration is trying to kind of slow things down a bit. There are various concerns on the US end. One is they want to make sure that the referendum does not weaken the Iraqi central government and weaken Abadi, because this, in the short to mid-term, the Americans believe could undermine the fight against the Islamic State and furthermore could open Iraq for further Iranian proxy action.
But Aykan, even if it is something that might weaken the Iraqi government in part, doesn't the United States perhaps have a moral obligation to support the Kurdish move for independence, given that they have been the ones leading the fight against Islamic State in parts of Iraq and also across Syria?
I think Washington, D.C. is quite torn on that issue. On the one hand, the mood in the U.S. Capitol is pro-Kurdish and pro-Kurdish independence, but at the same time there enters a real political calculation into the scene. There is Turkish opposition, there is Iraqi Baghdad's opposition, there are concerns about greater Iranian inroads, and I guess the US administrators are torn between these two conflicting demands. On the one hand, the moral obligation, and on the other, the reality on the ground in the short run.
Let's talk about Iraq as a whole for a minute. You have the Kurds wanting independence. You have people returning to their homes. They're going to have to live side by side with neighbors who perhaps supported ISIS. How do we prevent a civil war from breaking out again in Iraq?
Now, that is, again, a very important point, because only last week Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu raised the question of a potential civil war coming out of the referendum. Turkey has been quite ambivalent about the referendum. Publicly, Turkey discourages the referendum, but then in private, Turkey has quite cordial relations with the KDP. And probably Turkish President Erdogan has acquiesced the Kurdish referendum initiative. But at the same time, there are concerns in the region whether a referendum could trigger not only inter and intra-religious violence, but also inter and intra-ethnic violence as well, because the referendum is not only about Kurds and the KRG. There are disputed territories, including the Sinjar Mountains, where there are sizable Yazidis, some of whom seem to be aligned with the PKK and its Syrian affiliate, YPG. There are Christians, there are Jews also. There is the whole issue of the city of Kirkuk. There are big differences of opinion as to the future of Arabs, Kurds, and Turkmens in that city. So the referendum is both, on the one hand, something that the Kurds desire a lot, and they're moving very forcefully forward, but at the same time, I guess it has to be managed in a very delicate manner.
And assuming that it is managed delicately and that September referendum is not the precipitating event that might spark talk of a civil war, at a certain point Islamic State will be defeated and these issues will rise to the top. How soon do you think, what sort of timeline do you think the region and the United States are looking at before this really comes to the fore?
I think most likely scenario is that if the referendum goes forward, and I do believe that it will go forward, that wheels have really started turning, and it's very difficult to stop it at this point. But if it goes forward, probably the Kurdish government will take time to implement it. This will, in the short run, be mostly a symbolic victory. It will be a reaffirmation of the Iraqi Kurds' right to self-determination, but it might not immediately translate into drastic political action and secession from Iraq. We know that already there is a great deal of autonomy in the KRG. So practically speaking, some might argue that not much will change. I guess the key issues to watch are what will be the result in the disputed territories, what will be the KRG attitude toward the results in the disputed territories, whether there are moves towards a larger Kurdistan, which could kind of bring in reactions not only from Baghdad, but also from Ankara and the Turkish government.
Nothing is simple in that region. Thank you, Aykan Erdemir, for joining us.